This, just in, the Community Voice of the Civil Beat, Friday, November 22nd, 2019, an article written by Samuel Wilder King II, entitled, "It's Time to Hold TMT Protesters Accountable." A legitimate exercise in civil disobedience on Mauna Kea has morphed into an anarchic campaign against the rule of law. Whose law? As the protests against the 30-meter telescope approach 6 months, it seems like there has been a lull in the action. However, outside the view of the cameras, the video cameras, except for the panel discussions run by Imua TMT, there are many meetings happening to discuss what's next. Hopefully, a way can be found that involves the protesters voluntarily coming off the mountain. Based on my conversations with protesters and what I have seen in the media, I have absolutely no expectations that this will happen. Arrests will need to be made, and those arrests will cost taxpayer money. At this point, the debate needs to shift to how best to allocate the costs of the protests. I agree with Hawaii County Mayor Harry Kim's recent statement on the subject. Clearly, TMT is not at fault in any way. Blaming TMT for following the law is absurd. There is likely some inefficiency on behalf of the state that we can cut out of the $10 million price tag so far. But ultimately, the parties clearly responsible for the vast majority of these expenses are the protesters. They need to take responsibility for their actions and start paying up. As if that's not what we've been doing. Jeez. But who are the protesters? Who is backing them? Who are their leaders? Who are the decision makers? Which of those leaders and backers has deep pockets required to pay the taxpayers back? One way to answer these questions... I just can't believe what I'm reading. Whoops, sorry. I just can't believe what I'm reading. One way to answer these questions is to sue the protesters directly and find the answers through discovery in court. Another way is for the legislature to begin issuing subpoenas. This course of action should begin as soon as possible. What is the rush? The protests are morphing from what may have been a legitimate exercise in civil disobedience into an anarchic campaign against the rule of law. There have been not only illegal blockades on Mauna Kea Access Road, but the freeway in Honolulu. And to those who claim that blocking roadways is nonviolent, it is worth noting that blockades are actually acts of war. Unlike bulldozing temple shrines, sawing the Hawaiian flag in half with a target saw, prohibiting people from exercising their constitutional rights of freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, especially on DHHL land, freedom of speech, and other pesky little things like that. A good example of protests coming. Freudian slip. A good example of protests going too far was seen in the Mauna-inspired protests against the wind turbines in Kahuku, where protesters chopped down a utility pole with a chainsaw to prevent the transport of the wind turbines. Or could this be a bit of deflection? This act of vandalism resulted in power outages and traffic delays. False narratives. Recently, the protesters seem to have backed down. Let me read more closely. Backed down after the backlash with respect to the utility pole. Hopefully, they continue to show restraint. Kapu aloha for 126 years of illegal occupation. But who's counting? But when the arrests start on Mauna Kea and the protesters attempt to whip their support into a frenzy with false narratives on social media about police brutality, further further vandalism is a foreseeable outcome. Investigations starting now will make it clear to the protest leadership and those who continue to support the protesters in high dollar amounts that there will be consequences. This might convince the protesters to refrain from further acts of anarchy. Who are the protesters? Who is backing them? Because the protesters' activity is illegal and is inspiring further illegality across the state, there is no reason to avoid investigating them merely because they were not committing assault crimes on police officers. Or because they will claim some sort of persecution. There is no slippery slope McCarthyism problem because there is a clear, bright line. Extremely well-coordinated illegal activity. Sounds more like the false state RICO to me. You know, fraud, bribery, extortion, illegal occupation. In the age of weaponization of social media, as detailed in the Mueller report, and with reports from across the country of anarchists assisting protesters. Oh, my computer is just... Oh, my computer is impossible. Protesters with these kinds of blockade-style campaigns, it would be a reckless dereliction of duty for our elected officials to keep us ignorant of who's backing these protesters, where the protesters' funds come from, who their leadership is, and who runs their social media campaign. The public has a right to know. The next legislative session is also beginning soon. Hawaii has racked up millions of dollars in costs to taxpayers due to police responding to these protests, repairing the damage left behind. Unlike the DMT has already done, not to mention what it plans to do. And in lost productivity from road blockages, new laws may be necessary to ensure that the expense of anarchist-style protests is properly shifted to the protesters instead of onto the backs of working families of Hawaii. But the working families are the ones protesting. It's time to seek restitution from the persons most responsible for perpetuating this criminality. It is time for the legislature to start investigating the protesters and creating disincentives for such anarchism. Brought to you live on this day, yes, November 22nd, 2019, regarding the article written by Sam Wilder King II. It's time to hold TMT protesters accountable. Brought to you by Millicent Cummings. That's all the news that's fit to roast today. Aloha, aina. Kapu aloha. Ay, ay, ay. Kukia imona. Aloha.